All right, my name is Tanner Hickman, and I'm going to be talking today about Romanian orphans. I am interested in this topic. For one thing, I travel a lot. I've been to a lot of countries in Eastern Europe. I am currently in Armenia, and I was in Georgia for the last month. I thought I was going to end up going to Romania throughout the course of this project, but I decided to go further west instead. Um, I'm also just fascinated with geopolitics, particularly with former communist states and how that affected the populations and stuff like that. So, I want to talk about a little bit of history quickly. Um, a combination of post war modernization, extremely high female participation in the workforce, coupled with low standard of living, contributed to a really low birth rate in Romania in the 1950s and the early 60s. This was not okay with the former dictator of Romania, Nicolae Sikisau, I think. I don't know how to say his last name. I apologize. Um, he wanted to increase the population from 20 million to 30 million. Um, the Romanian leaders, particularly Nicolae, decided that the fault and the only reason why there was such a low birth rate in the country was the 1957 decree, which legalized abortion. They essentially blamed the entire problem, which was based on a lot of factors, on simply this legalized abortion. Um, so in 1967, he signed into law Decree 770. This law greatly restricted abortion in the country and essentially made it legal or illegal for women to have, uh, my apologies, it incentivized women to have at least five children. The decree legalized all abortions in the country with very few exceptions. If you were over the age of 45, which was later lowered to 40, and then when they realized that was absurd, they raised it again to 45, which is really not much better. Um, Women who had already had four children were exempt, which was later raised to five children. Um, and then women who either their life or the life of the baby was in danger, and in cases of rape and incest. So the initial results were quite staggering of this policy. In 1 year, from 1966 to 1967, the total fertility rate in the country um, went from 1.9 children per woman to 3.7 children per woman on average. And then uh, while childhood mortality or childbed mortality rather kept declining over the years in neighboring countries. Romania saw an increase of childbed mortality of mothers of more than 10 times that of its closest neighbors. So, the effect on the kiddos, which is what we're really here to talk about, is many children born during this time were very severely malnourished. This led to very high rates of physical disability, and these kids often ended up under very grievous conditions, which caused a vast rise in childhood mortality. The grievous conditions of these orphanages weren't really released or understood until the fall of communism in the country after decades of childhood suffrage. So let's talk about these orphanages a little bit. A major consequence of Nicola's nationalist policy was that large numbers of these children ended up living in orphanages because their parents could not cope with looking after them and likely had to give up at least some of their kids or oftentimes all of their children because of the poor living conditions in the country at the time. The vast majority of the children who lived in state run orphanages weren't actually orphanages, as the name implies. but just as I just explained, children that their parents could not afford to take care of them, so they were taken away from their homes. So I want to talk about one of the sources that I researched, the Special Romanian Committee that was established after the fall of Nicolae and his reign. Um, and it was established to basically study the crimes of their former dictator in the country. This determined that over 15,000 minors, orphans, had died in these orphanages and other residential facilities. These children often had physical or mental disabilities and were unwanted by their parents, whether out of necessity or due to other factors that cause these physical and mental disabilities, oftentimes malnutrition, really. Um, Many of these deaths, in particular, were brought on by neglect in these state run organizations, including starvation, even though a vast majority of these kids did not have any serious illnesses when they were admitted. So, one really staggering home that I dug up was Sighid's Children Home. Um, this service that I was just talking about really dug deep and explored this particular home. Um, this home only operated for a total of 30 months from 1967 to 19, I mean, sorry, not 1967, 1987 to 1989. And this home was established because other orphanages and facilities in the region were all full. And there was a complete overflux of orphans, unfortunately. Documents show that of the 138 children who died there in 30 months, which is astounding, 84 of them were 3 years old, which was the minimum age at the time that they were legally allowed to be taken away from their families. The most common cause of death in these kids was bronchopneumonia, which is a type of death that affects bronchi in the lungs. It's often brought on by malnutrition and poor living standards. And most of these kids were not struggling with anything and were healthy when they came, or relatively healthy when they came into this program, which is absolutely heartbreaking. So I want to talk about a little more positive, the Reuters ERA study. It was a study of 165 Romanian orphans who were adopted at a young age in Britain. The study aimed to discover if good care could make up for poor early care in these Romanian institutions. Um, so it studied 111 who were adopted before the age of 2, and then 54 who were adopted before the age of 4. There was also a control group of 52 British children who were all adopted before 6 months of age so that they could compare. And this study tested physical, cognitive, and emotional development at the ages of 4, and then again at 6 years old, and then again at 11 years old, and again at 15 years old. So it was pretty fascinating because at the time of adoption, the Romanian orphans were significantly behind their British counterparts on pretty much all measures, including physical, cognitive, and social development. They were smaller, they weighed less, and they were oftentimes classed as mentally retarded. By the age of 4, some of the Romanian orphans had caught up, and this was true for almost all of the Romanian children who were adopted by British families before the age of 6 months. Many of the children who were adopted after 6 months exhibited disinhibited attachments and had problems with peer relationships, particularly with their family members and their adopted families, meaning their adopted families. Um, This study is really interesting because it suggests that long term consequences may be less severe than was once thought of if children have the opportunity to form attachments. And it really shows that it makes a big difference the age at which these children have the opportunity to form these attachments. Obviously, the earlier the better. Um, but when children do fail to form attachments, the consequences can be extremely severe, as we saw, unfortunately, with all of these Romanian orphans. So here's my citations. These are documents I used for my research. These are my photo citations. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the year.